Wow, I was looking at the Epstein presser today, so many of the victims speaking on Capitol Hill, and I was thinking of you because you have made the point repeatedly that this story is one that you felt, I was using the phraseology that Trump can't outrun it. You've used different phraseology, but made essentially the same point. And the return of Congress has brought the return of this story, David K. Johnston.
Yeah, and it's very good to see that a number of the young women are in the position of saying, excuse me, we're the victims. Why are you not talking to us? And we want this out there. I listened to one this morning who was a guest on NPR. I did not think she was particularly carefully thought through in her answers, but she said, this all happened to us. That's not the issue about keeping us out of the public record. And it's not their names that we care about. It's Donald Trump and the other people around him. And whoever they are, I don't think it matters. I think that the issue is we need to know who these people were, but we need to know in the case of Donald Trump, because we cannot as a country be led by a serial child rapist.
The bobbing and weaving that he has found others to do, right? Pam Bondi, who demanded the release of these files, and now she says there are no files there. Oh, well, it turns out there's nothing really new in the files.
Well, nothing new in the files they released.
Yeah, which is true. And then, of course, Patel and Bongino, who've also, they've demanded historically over through podcasts and all the rest, transparency. Now they're in power, and they don't make those demands. They say there's no there as well. So, but the bobbing and weaving now has been joined by J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is sort of, I think, Donald Trump's real henchman. He's going to go out there and, clean things up. And they have, in essence, the White House issued a statement saying if you back this bill to release the Epstein files, you back this congressional action, we'll consider it a hostile act. Those were the words used by the White House. So it's more than just bobbing and weaving.
It's an astonishing thing that these are records of no consequence with nothing there. But if you want to make them public, we will destroy you.
Exactly.
It would require, to use Sam Elliott's phrase, the actor Sam Elliott, a special kind of stupid not to get the fundamental message there. There has to be material in there that will destroy Donald Trump, or they wouldn't care. They simply wouldn't care. And I'm sure there are some other people, depending on what they release and how, that this will matter to. Behind all of this, what we're seeing is, for decades, the Republican Party ran on what they said were a set of principles. Lower taxes for everybody, less regulation of business, less government interference in the economy, and transparency. Run the government like a business, and freedom. Liberty, freedom, all the time. And we're seeing that was just all nonsense. What we're seeing happen here is a government completely antithetical to those views. And I'm sure you wouldn't have trouble getting Republicans on who will say that. I was on Middle East TV today with a Trump supporter who said, yeah, I like these various things he's doing, but you can't argue that these other ones. Intel having give 10% of its equity over to the government. If you're an Intel shareholder, sounds like a good time to get lawyers. Telling a company you have to give us 15% of your revenue if you want to sell a particular kind of microchip to China. That has nothing to do with national security. If the issue is the government getting paid, we have rules that allow the government to control exports of anything considered a munition. And way back in time when Apple started making computers, and they made little Apple IIe computers. I owned one for me and one for my children at the time. The US government banned those from several countries as munitions because they could be used to calculate trajectories for artillery. So the government has plenty of power to do these things. What you're seeing is a crazy madman doing whatever the hell he wants. And as he said in the first term, I have an Article 2 of our Constitution that says I can do anything I want. Doesn't say anything like that, Mark, but he acts like it. And where are the Republicans who will stand up to him?
Well, it's government by intimidation on your last point. And I'm glad you mentioned Intel. Excuse me, clear my throat. Because the Intel thing was also a shakedown. It felt like a shakedown to me, right? He identifies the CEO of Intel as, this despicable guy. He's incompetent. He shouldn't be running and then he meets with him, decides that, we're going to get our beak wet to the point that it'll be a 10%. And that, as you say, there wasn't any kind of, if it's a legit security concern, then it's not a question of, being bought in for 10%. He gets bought in for 10%. He pivots to, this is the greatest guy. I think I've changed my mind on him. He's really terrific. It's so clunky, David. It's classic Trump. You've documented this, it goes back decades.
Well,
it's all right there.
Look, you can like or dislike Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, but all of them have an identified set of principles. The only principles Donald ever identifies are me, 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 me. I'm the one who's been harmed. I'm the one who's been wronged. I alone can save you. I alone care about you. Everything is about him, and it's indicative of his very deep mental illness, and it's very, very troubling that people are not willing to stand up to him. And it's not like if you stand up, you're going to get shot, at least not at this stage of his effort to overthrow our government. But
you'll be assassinated
what's the worst
politically.
thing you risk?
Right?
You'll be Jody Ernst. You're not going to be electable again.
Exactly. Right. That's exactly it. They'll take you down politically. At least that's the implied threat. And in this case, like today, it's the explicit threat. You're in reference to the Epstein stuff. You talk about his mental health. I want to talk about his physical health for a moment. He does seem labored in moments when he's speaking. He's certainly way off, any kind of coherence at times. Speak to his situation with regard to that stuff.
Well, a number of people, and I talked to Dr. Bandy Lee about this not too long ago, a number of people who deal with older Americans say that Donald is showing signs of cognitive decline. And Alzheimer's, which people think of right away, is just a kind of dementia. There are lots of different things that happen in your brain. Now, not being able to remember a word, if you're my age, and I'm almost as old as Donald, that happens. It can happen to you in your 20s. But Donald can't stick with a theme for any period of time, and he goes off on answers that have nothing to do with the question asked. Now, you're putting up there right now a picture of his the back of his hand with a large bruise on it. That is very often indicative that he's getting some kind of injection through a needle that's put in his arm and is there maybe all night long while he's sleeping. And he's put makeup on it to cover up. The swollen ankles can be signs of a number of things, including congestive heart failure, and that the veins that are supposed to return the blood from the arteries back up to the heart are slipping, and you're getting a buildup there. You'll also notice, if you watch Donald at least as carefully as I do and study a lot of the footage, Donald has big emotional swings. So there are days when he, at least in the past, would walk smartly somewhere. And there are other days when he walked like someone who is deeply depressed and is sort of forcing himself to move along. And when he's in that mood, you can see it in his answers and his commentaries, where he's just, why am I here? Disconnected. So, I mean, Donald is not physically or mentally well and hasn't been for a long, long time. But no, Washington Press Corps does not, as a general rule, talk about that unless there's something like the ability to get the images of his ankles, which he now hides by how he sits and where he sits. It's just sort of off limits, in the same way that when FDR had a mistress in the White House, when Eisenhower had a mistress, when a whole group of other presidents, not Ronald Reagan not Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, or Richard Nixon, but a bunch of others, Democrats and Republicans. George H.W. Bush had a mistress at the State Department. It wasn't reported on. It was considered outside the reasonable limits of what to report on. President's health has been on the agenda since 1980, when the New York Times sent Dr. Lawrence Altman, a physician who was a reporter at the New York Times and a friend of mine, to go and inquire about Ronald Reagan's health. And we should know about his health. And if you're foolish enough to think that Donald weighs 235 pounds, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn.
Yeah, well, any of the official pronouncements as to his health, that you can pretty much, just put those in the circular file.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that, those who want to build their own narrative put together little bits and pieces of Donald Trump's, the bruising, him being off camera for 6 days, and before you know it, they are talking about the fact he hasn't been playing golf, that he's deceased. I mean, we go from, zero to deceased pretty quickly. I think there's a lot of sort of wishing for this guy. You said it before. You don't want him offed at all. You don't want him to pass away.
Right.
You just want him out of public policy. Yeah.
But Donald has disappeared in the past. When he was running against Hillary Clinton, and she exhausted herself to the point where we saw her, she was sick. She should have taken a day off. She collapsed getting into a van, and Donald made a big deal out of that. Everybody forgets Donald disappeared several times during the campaign. And he might call up Fox News and talk to people on their morning show, but that was it. We didn't see him. And that's how Donald's been as long as I've known him, which is since 1988. He has these mood swings, and a lot of people have them. Doesn't mean that, that by itself doesn't mean that you have a mental illness, but there are lots of people who, instead of having a steady keel, they have ups and downs.
Let's just move, David, to what he's talking about openly, and that is moving troops into American cities. On one level, I see it as, and I see, I guess, everything that's a public pronouncement as adjacent to the distraction model that he has to keep going for Epstein. And it does seize the news cycle. I mean, it's effective that way. But now it will coexist in the news cycle with Epstein. But that said, now he's getting pushback from like J.B. Pritzker, who's really pretty good on this. Albert, do you have the Pritzker stuff? I wanted to play it for David. But as he gets pushback from Chicago, which is which is Pritzker's state, right, Illinois, he's now saying maybe I'll take the troops to New Orleans. I mean, it's like it's a weird kind of road testing he's doing. Here's a little of Pritzker, though. I was impressed by the way he pushed back.
Reliable agents in unmarked vehicles with masks are planning to raid Latino communities and say they're targeting violent criminals. As we saw in Los Angeles, a very, very small percentage of the individuals they will target will be violent criminals. Instead, you're likely to see videos of them hauling away mothers and fathers, traveling to work or picking up their kids from school. Sometimes they will detain, handcuff, and haul away children. They are law-abiding individuals who pay taxes and contribute to the communities who feel safe going to work and attending mandatory immigration check-ins. In other words, they're following the law. We have reason to believe that Stephen Miller chose the month of September to come to Chicago because of celebrations around Mexican Independence Day that happen here every year. It breaks my heart to report that we have been told ICE will try and disrupt community picnics and peaceful parades. Let's be clear, the terror and cruelty is the point, not the safety of anyone living here. Third, as lawful citizens exercise their First Amendment rights, Trump and his team will be looking for any excuse to put active duty military on our streets, supposedly to protect ICE. We have reason to believe that the Trump administration has already begun staging the Texas National Guard for deployment in Illinois. I want to be very clear on this point, and I want to speak directly to the press right now. We know before anything has happened here that the Trump plan is to use any excuse to deploy armed military personnel to Chicago. If someone flings a sandwich at an ICE agent, Trump will try and go on TV and declare an emergency in Chicago. I'm imploring everyone, if and when that happens, do not take the bait.
So that's J.B. Pritzker in Chicago. Thank you, Albert, for that. I was impressed by that. I thought he spoke plainly about the threat.
Well, Pritzker, who's part of a very large, wealthy, and highly educated family, I think has been resolute all the way along, has not cowered in any way whatsoever, and he's not going to. And let me point out two, I think, significant things here. I only lived in Chicago for 6 months of my life, so I don't know that much about it. But Los Angeles, where I lived for 10 years, and in California for 36, when I was investigating the LAPD for the LA Times in 1980 to the beginning of 83, there were 1,000 murders a year in LA and 3 million people. LA now has 4 million people. It's one of the few big cities that's really grown in the last 30, 40 years. So it's gone from 3 million to 4 million. And the number of homicides has gone from 1,000 a year to 300. I'm sorry, where is the crime problem here? And most of the murders, by the way, are between hostile intimates, where it has nothing to do with law enforcement. You kill your lover, your spouse, your business partner. Those killings, law enforcement has little to no ability to do anything about it. And in fact, here at RIT, the Criminal Justice School issues reports about this stuff. I teach a course in criminal justice here. So Pritzker is exactly right. This is not what Donald is doing. Now, the other thing is he's sending troops from Texas to Illinois. Why is he doing that? Well, just think back to Tiananmen Square. When the students demonstrated against the communist regime, against the thugs who run Beijing in 19, whatever year it was, 80 something, they sent troops who were from the Beijing Federal District area, and they would not shoot the people who they knew, or they knew there'd be family members or people they knew. So they replaced them with troops that were brought in from the north of China. And that's what Trump is doing here. You get people who are from a distant place, they don't have any sense of this, and then you go after their morality. And let me point out, anybody who follows illegal orders better be prepared, because if we get through this and we get our democracy back in full, you may well end up, if you're in the National Guard, you may well end up with a long sentence in a military prison for what you did, especially if you're an officer.
Yeah, when the shoe drops, it may drop hard. Yeah. It's interesting. That's a really great point that you're making about the connection that people from the same community or the same state feel. So that National Guard coming in from Texas to Illinois, they don't have that connection. Right. And so they're far more free, in a sense, psychologically, to break the kind of oath that they would otherwise maintain.
And it's not like this is cost-free, by the way. You're in the National Guard, a weekend warrior, as we say, and suddenly you're deployed for 2 months in Los Angeles or Chicago or somewhere else. That means you're not earning your salary at your position. The business that you work for, whether you're a doctor with a medical office or you're putting parts together for some piece of machinery, isn't getting your work. There's an enormous social cost and economic cost to these actions, which are just plain flat out illegal. And today I was on another show with someone overseas who said, well, he's only the 9th president who's done this, and rattled off presidents who said they've sent the National Guard to deal with riots. And I went, yeah, where's the riot in Los Angeles? At the peak of the demonstrations against ICE, I calculated that it was 0.0000037% of the city of LA that was involved geographically in the demonstrations. And there was no property damage of any significance. And I'm sorry, throwing a deli sandwich at someone is not a riot.
Yeah,
and you keep hearing, by the way, Trump people saying, well, they burned Los Angeles down in the early 90s? No, it was certain neighborhoods in South Central LA. It was far from, it was a tiny fraction of the city. That isn't justifying riots and illegal conduct. It's just, let's remember proportionality.
Well, you're right. In the 90s, during the Rodney King riots, the riots following that
Acquittal.
judgment and the court case, there was a real sense that LA was teetering, and you needed the National Guard, and actually the National Guard was and invoking the National Guard and the power of the National Guard was completely sanctioned by mayor, governor, et cetera. That's a totally different process.
Yeah, and
here
now
you have,
they're opposed by these mayors and governors saying, we don't want this to happen.
Thank you.
But, the goal here is intimidation and total power. They're not there yet. Donald is consolidating power. He continues to go through and get rid of various people, some of whom are going to be reinstated by the courts. He's working to make those commissions that are required by law to be some Democrats and some Republicans. The majority party gets the majority of the seats. He's removing Democrats so they can't function. And that's another part. If you can't overcome the government and turn it into your personal tool, just make it unable to function.
Sure. And that's on the regulatory side. I mean, he's taking all the cops off the beat, so that should tell you right there what's happening. Everything from the financial markets to law enforcement. And it's interesting, David. I've got a question for you that I don't want to. This is from Depressed Canadian, who. Thank you for the $50 super chat. What does David K. Johnston do to combat a general sense of nihilism or deep cynicism? It just seems like constant cover-ups out in the open. Can you speak to that?
Well, there are constant cover-ups out in the open. Donald tells us, I'm going to commit this crime. He just doesn't call it a crime, and he's very open about it because he feels he cannot be vanquished. And the cynicism is a real problem. Cynicism only helps the oppressors. You need to be optimistic. You need to think we're going to defeat this. We're going to regain in full our democracy. And by the way, if we succeed in this and we get Trump and his ilk out of there, that's not the end. That's the beginning of building a new and better society. By the way, one fortunate thing is that in every court except the U.S. Supreme Court, Donald is generally losing. He's lost essentially 96% of the cases. The posse comitatus law was cited just, I guess, yesterday or this morning by the federal judge who said, yeah, this deployment of troops to Los Angeles was illegal. You can't do that. And you've got two grounds here. Donald is trying to use the 1798 Alien Sedition Acts, which our first mentally ill president, John Adams, great patriot, but was paranoid, got passed, and all but one section of that law was thrown out in order to justify what you can do under the 1798 law. You have to have an invasion. Trump says we're being invaded from the south, and in the other moment he says, we had the lowest number of illegal crossings of this country in the history, and certainly in modern history since we started keeping data about it. So he doesn't care about the law. That's just a pretext. That's just a cover. And it's why he has the corrupt Pam Bondi, the corrupt Kash Patel, and the utterly incompetent and unqualified Don Magnino as deputy at the FBI. Because these are people who, they'll do whatever he tells them to do. And if we get through this, hopefully those people are going to be prosecuted and they're going to go to prison.
So you'd say to Depressed Canadian and those of us who are downcast about the fact that he's been able to populate the government with all of these loyalists and been able to sort of shine on any kind of legal judgments and do what he wants and pursue these chaotic and ridiculous self-serving policies. You'd say we can try after all of this. First of all, you'd say, I think you'd point to the courts is what I'm getting from you.
Right. Except
we'll find out what the Supreme Court says about tariffs and the rest. And then you'd say that this will pass. This too, his takeover is not complete. It may seem complete, but it's not complete.
He's far from complete. I mean, he's acting as a dictator. There's no question, but he is far from having complete control. And we can still stop him. But if people become cynical, if they go, oh, no, I'm too busy, I need to watch my baseball game or my football game, then we're not going to get there. And it's important to call upon leaders. I mean, where are the pastors, rabbis, and imams saying this is wrong and this is immoral? I'm sure there are some doing that, but you don't see that as part of a big movement. The labor leaders, shrunken as labor is, need to be standing up and saying this is wrong. Anybody who's a moral philosopher, and we got a whole world full of them here, they should be standing up and saying this is wrong. And people who believe Donald Trump is their special savior, particularly if they call themselves Christians, really need to be called to account, because what Donald Trump is doing is violently, disgustingly anti-Christian. I mean, if you're really a Christian, your obligation is to care for the stranger, to take in the stranger, to make sure that they're clothed and fed. I just taught my law class last night about the history of debt, and we went into Leviticus, where if a poor person has borrowed money from you and their security is their cloak. Remember, Israel is a desert society, so like Las Vegas, it's 120 degrees, the sun goes down, now it's 60 degrees or 40 degrees. You had to give the person back their cloak, even if they hadn't paid off their debt to you until sunrise, because otherwise they would freeze to death or they might well die from being too cold. We have moral rules for a reason, because human experience has taught us that we need to treat other people in a decent way. Stephen Miller, I mean, when he was in high school at Santa Monica High, he had to be taken off the stage because he went into this horrible racist rant. And he's been that way his whole life. His family has said something's wrong with him, but he's got Donald Trump's ear like nobody else.
Yeah, I mean, this configuration, as it is right now, leaves Miller in charge of a lot. And it looks like September is going to be a big surge for his ICE crew. They're paying those $50,000 incentive signing bonuses to those who leave other law enforcement agencies and join ICE. They've lowered the threshold, as you know, physically, the weight requirements, the education requirements, everything. Just want to get more people involved in ICE. And so you have these glorified nightclub bouncers taking some guy out of a car wash and throwing him down to the ground like he's a drug kingpin. It's disgusting. It's grotesque to me.
Well, and remember, in his first term, Donald said to police on Long Island, I don't know why you're always putting your hand on the guy's head so he doesn't hit the door frame. You should rough him up some. That was a clear declaration that I am not in favor of the rule of law. After all, people who are arrested are suspects. They're not convicted. Do most suspects get convicted? Sure. But that's not the point. As Blackstone taught us in 1766, and his words are still taught to every lawyer and judge in the country, you have to respect the rule of law first and foremost. And the principle that better that 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man be wrongly convicted still stands. And the reason for that is very simple. If you just arrest people left and right, like gang members I talked to in LA back in the early 80s, who were like, yeah, well, why not go commit crimes? The LAPD is going to just arrest you anyway, and they're going to put you in prison whether you did anything wrong or not. So why not? That's not the attitude you want to have. We have to have very deep respect for innocence. Trump doesn't have that. Look at how he talks about other people when, of course, in all of that, he's projecting his own criminal conduct.
No, the projection is insane. All right, I'm out of time, but I'm going to quickly push you for one more minute and ask about the Supreme Court and the consideration of the tariffs. To me, it seems like a huge case looming. Should they rule and affirm the notion that the tariffs are illegal, I mean, imposed in an illegal way by this president, then there's going to be a gaggle of court cases to get that money back. I mean, businesses have gone under, David, because of the withering nature of these tariffs, and those businesses are going to want to recover damages as a result of that. Can you just game that out?
Yes,
quickly,
I mean,
please?
if you claim that you are an originalist or a textualist, or you read the Constitution in its original setting, this is a no-brainer. Donald Trump has no authority to do this. The reason that we live in the Second American Republic under the Constitution was that the first American Republic, the Articles of Confederation, had no power to tax and no power to regulate business. That's the reason we have our Constitution, is to tax ourselves. We don't teach in our schools, but that's the reality of it. And Article 1, the legislative provision, Section 8, the powers we grant to Congress, Clause 1, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, that's what a tariff is, a duty, and imposts. And except for this very limited area that's never really been used in emergencies, because it takes Congress a while to meet, just even if you need them right away, it takes a day or two to assemble them in Washington. The president has no power to impose tariffs. And the specialized court that hears tariff cases, in its opinion, laid out a primer for anybody who doesn't understand how this works to know that the president has no such authority. The reason a number of governments around the world are saying, oh yeah, we made a deal with you, and then you see nothing's happened, nothing's signed, is that, they know perfectly well Trump has no power to do this. And if the Supreme Court finds some way to pretzel the law, to pretzel the Constitution, you should really be worried that that is the end of the American experiment, because once they do that, they've signaled Trump, just keep going, pal. Just keep gaining dictatorial powers. Dictators can impose taxes and tariffs, and they can say, well, we're going to tax you, Mark Thompson, but not your friend who has a podcast and lives in the house next door who we like.
Right.
And so it's absolutely crucial. And I cannot imagine Gorsuch going along with this on Trump. I absolutely, however, believe that you will see Alito and Thomas do anything Donald wants. They'll find some way to, some exigent circumstances, this part of the Constitution isn't clear, some sort of nonsense.
Yeah.
So I think the important people in this are going to be the three liberals, Amy Coney Barrett, who has shown some thoughtfulness and independence, and then John Glover Roberts, who we thought was an institutionalist. It's not entirely clear anymore, and Gorsuch. And Kavanaugh, I don't know. But this is terribly important that the Supreme Court not just say these tariffs are illegal, unconstitutional, but that it says so strongly and definitively the president may not assert powers specifically given to Congress.
Yeah, this would be a huge brushback pitch here. They come in again, I believe, the beginning of next month, right? October.
Supreme Court? Yes,
Yeah.
The first Tuesday after the 1st of October,
Right.
second Tuesday in October, basically.
David, thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate it. David
See you
K.
next
Johnston,
week
everybody.
on the right day of the week.
Yeah, see you next Tuesday.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.